Hi friend, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to do a little November recap. I read 7 books last month and I would love to tell you about them. And I know I was only holding 6 books right there. One of them was an audiobook. I'll start with Feral Creatures by Kira Jane Buxton. This is the second book in the duology she wrote that started with Hollow Kingdom. Was a very creative take on apocalyptic fiction. That is not something I typically go for, but my husband saw Hollow Kingdom, bought this, and he read them first and said, Sarah, I think you would really like it. And I gave it a shot. The main character of our story is a domesticated crow. It goes by ST. That is short for something, but I'm not going to say it here. So this is the continuation of ST's story. At the end of the first book, he has a really big discovery. Both of these books center around the animals and the earth itself that's left behind when something happens to us humans and we no longer exist like we do in our current form. I found it was really funny. I enjoyed it. I personally enjoyed it just as much as the first one. Obviously, an apocalypse has happened, so things have to eventually get more serious. I would say the first one was probably a little bit funnier, but this one had its moments. I definitely laughed through parts of this, which, you know, is special considering that it's also kind of scary. If any part of you is like, this sounds interesting, I would highly recommend checking it out and adding both Hollow Kingdom and Feral Creatures to your TBR. Like, this is one that I could see myself going back and rereading again someday. The next book I read was Evil Eye by Itaf Rum. I was able to snag this one from the library and I really need to take it back. In this book, our main character, Yara, is just really going through it. The book focuses on about a year of her life when just the life that she thought she wanted, the life that she thought she was building, kind of comes crumbling down, and she has to deal with the aftermath of that. She has to traverse through a lot of her own personal past to come out on the other side. And like that in itself would make this a beautiful book, but layered on top of all of that is like Yara is Palestinian, her family's Palestinian, her husband's Palestinian, her parents are Palestinian, and her parents came to America with the hopes of a better life. Yara is dealing with a lot of generational trauma and she's having to unpack that. I found Yara incredibly relatable, as she was a mother and I was a mother. I was a mother. As just mother to mother, I found a lot of her thoughts and experiences, especially in early motherhood and coming to terms with who you are after you become a mother, because it's not like while you are changed, your needs, desires, and interests, it's not like those change simply because you become a mom. And that was discussed a lot in this book. And I found myself through many times throughout this book wishing that Yara was real so that I could just hug her, because there were just many thoughts that she has that I was like, I've had those too. Yara is a character that she will live with me for a long time. It was really beautiful. This is one of the first pieces of literary fiction that I've read in a long time, and I think it has kind of reopened that door for me, which also feels good. I know Itaf Rum has another book called A Woman Is No Man, and I would definitely like to read that in 2024. Next we have Godkiller by Hannah Kaner. I really liked this, and I'm very excited that I kind of waited until later of this year to read this, because I know the second book, whose title is escaping me, I think it's Sunbearer or Sunbringer, one of those, is coming out in like February of next year, and I'm very excited to read the sequel and see where this tale goes. Godkiller is the story of a Godkiller named Kissin in the country that she lives in. That is her profession. Gods have been outlawed for the most part, and it's just a really interesting take on that kind of magic, and that she has the means to destroy these gods that are built mostly off of like the belief and love and energy of the people who choose and want to believe in them. And I really just thought that was really cool. But through a series of events, Kissin ends up on a quest with a former knight, a young noble, and a small god that is connected to said young noble, which gave me strong like Golden Compass vibes, if I'm being honest. Not in a bad way. It was just that reminded me of like that connection between, you know, child and their, I forget what it's called in the Golden Compass, but the animal companion that they have that connection with, if you've ever read that book and that series. So they're on a quest, and of course the quest has dangers. There's a significant plot thickening. I don't know if it's necessarily a twist. I guess it's a twist, but I'm gonna call it a significant plot thickening at the end of this book, and it's just really well set up for the next book. If you need a not super long, solid fantasy, I would recommend picking this one up. Next, I read A Study in Drowning by Ava Reed, and for whatever reason, I didn't know if I wanted to read this one when it was first released. I heard lots of people saying great things about it, and all the things that they were saying were like, yeah, that sounds good, but for whatever reason, I just couldn't decide yay or nay if I wanted to give it a shot. But they had it at the library on a day that I was feeling like I did want to read it, and that's usually how it goes for me with library books, where it's like if I feel like I want to check one out, I need to be able to go like right away and do it before I change my mind. And they had this one, and I was able to snag it, and once I started, I couldn't put it down. I finished it, I think, in 2 days. I really, really enjoyed this story, and I'm really glad that I read it. A Study in Drowning centers on Effie, who is a young college student in the architecture school, kind of like the biggest college in her country. It wasn't her first choice, but she's incredibly smart, and so this was kind of like the next best thing for her. You quickly learn that Effie has been through some stuff. She has a past, and it does take its toll on her mental health, which I appreciated the inclusion and just discussion of, you know, mental health in this story. But she wins a very mysterious contest where the prize is to go to her favorite author's home and help to design this new estate that they're going to be building on this land. Effie quickly realizes that not everything is as it seems. There's another student there who's also doing some digging about this author. The author had recently passed away, and before too long, the two start to work together, and they start to learn some things and unravel like more of the story around this author and this really famous book that he wrote. And along the way, Effie is, of course, dealing with her past and this dream that she's had her whole life about the Fairy King. And that's kind of where some of that fairy tale-ness comes into the story. So it really has so many things. You know, it's a dark fairy tale. It has a very sweet romance, and it's a little bit history leaning in that, you know, what they're learning and the information that they're working with has to do with like the history of, you know, their country and this author. This is a book that I really wish I could go back and read it again for the first time, just to experience it again. Next, I read Against the Loveless World by Susan Abalawa. This book centers on a character named Nar, who is sharing her life story from inside an Israeli solitary confinement cell. Yeah, heavy, right? But it is about her absolutely beautiful, hard human life. And I mean all those things. Her life had beautiful moments. Her life had very hard moments. But I really, again, books like this, these books of literary fiction that help us to learn more about the Palestinian experience are just so important. So Nar is a young woman whose family has been displaced from Palestine, and she finds herself kind of on the outskirts of society. She gets married very young, and that marriage does not work out. And, there's the stigma that's associated with that. Not that divorce isn't allowed in her culture. It very much is, but there's still, people like to gossip, and there's the whispers. And so she just ends up running with a crowd that maybe isn't super traditional. And that just kind of sets her on this, well, first of all, the marriage, and then the ending of that marriage, and then kind of what happens after the marriage sets her on this trajectory that ends up leading her into the world of resistance. And that's how, she ends up where she is. But all of the experiences that she has, as difficult as parts of this book were to read, I found Nar's story so compelling. I love the way Susan Abalawa wrote it. You can tell the amount of research that went into what it's like to be in a prison like that, in solitary confinement, all the things. They're picking up my recycling now. So we'll just take a little coffee break, right? And while Nar is a fictional character, you can tell how representative she is of so many. And I am still incredibly moved by this book, and it is one that I will be recommending to many people for the foreseeable future. The last physical book that I read this month is A Grandmother Begins the Story by Michelle Porter. And this tells the story of 5 generations of Métis women, as well as some bison and some dogs, which were really lovely additions to the story. The Métis, as far as I know, are one of the recognized Indigenous populations in Canada. And this story is really about how this matriarchal line is having to heal and process and come to terms with their family's experience with what I believe is, forced assimilation. It's not discussed heavily in the book, what the family went through, but it is alluded to, that some of the members underwent some treatments. Some of them were forced into residential schools, and some of them were kept from their culture for much of their life. It was a very unique read. The chapters are very short, and it is constantly shifting from one point of view to the next. It was a very interesting exploration of just what generational trauma can look like, how it can manifest, but also, there's hope. And I also just really loved the themes of maternal, I want to call it maternal power, just like that power of maternal energy and care, and how important it is. That's just something that came up a lot for me as I was reading this, as these women are kind of reaching back 1, 2, 3, 4 generations as needed to try and pull this family back together. And individually they're all trying to heal, but then you can also see how all of their healing, like I said, on this side of the void and the other, are interwoven. And no matter what, all of our families have those traumas that have occurred every generation. And we, the ones at the bottom, we are a product of that. Generational trauma is a thing. And, it is very important to recognize this significant amount of trauma that was inflicted on the native populations of this world and is still being inflicted upon them. but also I think it's very helpful to note that, but also recognize that, again, it's that argument that you never know what somebody else is going through or dealing with. So, and it's best to operate from that place where we're all just trying to be more understanding humans. It was a really cool read. I really was intrigued because of the cover and like the beautiful, like, I think it's supposed to depict the beaded artwork. I thought it was beautiful. And I just saw this on the back and I agreed, like, what courage to blow a hole through all expectations of what a story can be and how it's told. And I agree with that. I don't know. This is another one that I could see myself recommending to a lot of people for the foreseeable future. I honestly think I'm going to give it to my mom now that I've told you about it here on my channel. I think I'm going to hand it over to my mom and see if she wants to read it. And then the last book I read was The Kiss Curse by Erin Sterling. I did this one as an audiobook, and I read The X-Hex by that author last year around, the fall, like Halloween time. And I really loved The X-Hex. And I did like The Kiss Curse. This one centers on Gwen. She's the cousin of the, main character. I think it's Viv from the first one. And it's just like, it's after the events of the first book when one of the other Penhallows brothers comes to town for one reason or another. They don't like each other at first because the new brother opens up a shop right across the street from Gwen's witchy shop. And then, things go from there. I did like it. I did enjoy it. I liked The X-Hex more, but it was still enjoyable. It was a perfect nighttime listen. Like, I like to have an audiobook, like a feel-good audiobook for nighttime when I'm like getting ready for bed and I'm winding down. I don't like to stress myself out too much. I said try, because sometimes there's just things that need to be read before bedtime because I need to read more and find out what happens next. But for the most part, I love like something softer and easier on the stress levels, a little bit more on the fun side before bed. And so that's usually where a lot of my audiobook picks come in, because they're what I will be reading, later in the evening. And The Kiss Curse was super fun and great for that. And that was my November. So I would love to know in the comments if you had a favorite book that you read in November, or if any of these are books that you read too. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.